Last month, there were two unfortunate accidents involving lorries that were transporting workers. The first occurred when the lorry ferrying 17 workers collided into a stationary truck along the Pan Island Expressway and resulted in 2 fatalities. The lorry driver has been arrested for careless driving causing death. The second incident involved a lorry ferrying 9 workers, but fortunately, there were no fatalities. 3 days ago, there was an accident between a police van and a lorry ferrying 11 workers. 17 people, including 5 police officers, were conveyed to the hospital with minor injuries. We are deeply saddened by the accidents and would like to offer our deepest condolences to the affected families. The accidents are currently being investigated by the traffic police. The party or parties found responsible will be dealt with based on our laws. Members have raised concerns on the use of lorries to ferry workers. Internationally, practices are varied. Countries such as Canada, Thailand, and the United States of America allow for passengers to be ferried in the rear deck of goods vehicles traveling on roads, albeit with safety precautions and some restrictions. From a road safety perspective, it will be ideal for lorries not to carry any passengers in their rear decks. But there are very significant practical and operational issues on top of just cost considerations, which is probably why internationally it is not an uncommon practice. I want to assure members that we take seriously the safety and well-being of all workers, including our foreign workers, without whose contribution Singapore will not be what it is today. As far back as 2008, a work group co-chaired by the Ministry of Manpower and the Land Transport Authority conducted a thorough review of the safety of workers being transported on lorries. The work group included members from industry associations, the National Safety Council of Singapore, traffic police, and other government agencies. Over more than a year, the work group studied the issue extensively and consulted widely, including industry groups, safety experts, and transport operators. At that time, companies, especially small and medium enterprises in the construction industry, had strongly urged the government to allow them to continue ferrying their workers in lorries. The industry associations also provided strong feedback that switching to dedicated bus transport will lead to significantly higher business costs. Other practical challenges were also highlighted. For instance, while lorries can have dual use for transporting workers and equipment, buses cannot, and this will result in significant productivity loss. Other proposals, such as using vans with smaller capacities or lowering the cap on deck capacity, were also considered. But there were concerns about driver fatigue and therefore safety, as more trips will have to be made to ferry workers from one site to another. The work group studied the various feedback carefully and laid out a set of recommendations to preserve workers' safety and livelihoods. As a result, the government implemented enhanced safety measures for lorries ferrying passengers in 2009 and 2010. These include fitting higher protective side railings and canopy covers and higher penalties for non-compliance, up to 5 times more. The work group's recommendations aim to protect not only the workers' safety, but also their livelihoods, which was a difficult challenge. Since then, we have continued to review and refine our regulations. For example, since 2015, all S-Pass and work permit holders are required to pass the necessary theory and practical driving tests before they can obtain a Singapore Class 3 license that will allow them to drive light goods vehicles, including those which transport workers in the rear decks. Over the last decade, the number of persons on board lorries who were injured or killed in road traffic accidents has been on a downward trend. In 2019, the injury rate of persons on board lorries is about 8.1 per 1,000 lorries, which is lower than the injury rate of persons on board all motor vehicles at 8.4 per 1,000 motor vehicles. In 2020, traffic volumes were lower due to COVID-19 restrictions, and the injury rate of persons on board lorries was about 4.5 per 1,000 lorries, compared to 5.6 persons on board all motor vehicles per 1,000 motor vehicles. For this year, up to March, the injury rate of persons on board lorries is about 1.5 per 1,000 lorries, comparable with that for persons on board all motor vehicles. Data for the full month of April 2021 is not yet available. The number of persons on board lorries who were killed in road traffic accidents has also been on a downward trend. From 2011 to 2015, an average of 9 persons on board per year were killed in road traffic accidents. This dropped to 2.6 per year from 2016 to 2020, or 2.5 if we exclude 2020. That said, declining injuries and fatalities from such accidents should not make us complacent. One life lost is still one too many. Back in 2008, the work group had thoroughly considered how to prevent this, and many of the suggestions raised by the members today were previously studied by the work group. For example, the work group found that retrofitting seat belts in the rear decks of lorries could result in other safety risks. This is because commercially available lorries are not designed for seat belts to be installed in the rear deck, and the floorboards in the rear deck might not be sufficiently strong to keep the seat belts anchored in the event of an accident. Compared to 10 years ago, regulatory changes at this time will cause even more acute pain to the industry, given that the industry is being severely affected by COVID-19. Worker supply has been disrupted, leading to severe manpower shortages. Projects are already delayed, and productivity has been affected because of safe management measures. Further regulations will likely have impact on the completion of various building projects, from BTOs to MRTs to nursing homes and hospitals, spell the demise of some companies and the loss of workers' livelihoods. We cannot simply ignore these considerations. Notwithstanding the improvement made over the years, one fatality, and in fact one injury, is still one too many. We appeal to all road users to drive safely and responsibly. The government will continue to conduct public education so that lorry drivers and owners are reminded of the rules. LTA has also been stepping up enforcement to catch errant owners and drivers. The government will continue to refine our policies and regulations to further minimize such situations involving our workers. We have brought down the accident rates of lorries over the years and will continue to strive to do so. We note the concerns regarding this issue, and understandably so. But this is an issue with multifaceted considerations and wider ramifications, including on workers' livelihoods. We will continue to review the safety rules, engaging the various stakeholders along the way to see how to enhance these measures further. Meanwhile, I urge all employers to do their part to ensure the welfare and safety of their staff. Members of the public can also call LTA's hotline to report any non-compliance with safety regulations.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I thank the Senior Minister of State for her response. We often quote trade-offs and costs as part of our decision-making matrix. But I think for the families in the recent accidents who have lost their sons in Singapore, I think that cost would surmount all other costs that we talk about. The SMS spoke earlier about the work group back from 2010. It's been over 10 years already. Would the ministry consider, therefore, reconvening another work group to restudy new proposals as well as improvements in vehicle designs over the last 11 years that could potentially have new solutions to improve safety on board lorries? In terms of other safeguards, there have been substantial studies internationally on the constraint of speed and how that would impact results out of accidents. So therefore, would the ministry also consider safeguards such as constraining speeds of lorries for the time being until new solutions can be found to perhaps 40 kilometers per hour so that it significantly improves survivability as well as safety at this speed? In terms of seatbelt, I hear what the SMS has said, that the design of the lorries, so on and so forth. We've done that for the SAF. We've introduced seatbelts to our 5-tonners. Over and above that, will the ministry also consider requiring owners and operators to also tie down the equipment that they transport together with the workers, because it's often these free-flying projectiles in an accident that cause a significant amount of injuries?
I thank the member for his questions. Let me reiterate again that passenger safety is very important. We agree with that. And as I've said earlier, every fatality and every injury is one too many. And we do want to continue to strive to enhance and preserve the safety of our workers when they are using the roads or when they are being ferried. But as I've also noted in my answer earlier, this is a multi-faceted issue with many ramifications. And indeed, even as we consider all these issues, we need to be also mindful that we need to find a balanced and calibrated approach in order to preserve the safety of workers as well as their livelihoods. With regards to the further questions on the various measures that could be taken, firstly about convening a work group, as I've said, we have been monitoring the situation even since the last review, as well as refining the measures. So in 2015, we have actually introduced this requirement of not just getting the foreign workers to take a basic theory test, but also to pass our Class 3 driving license if they want to drive the Class 3 vehicle. And we are currently undertaking a review of the measures with a view of looking at how we can enhance these measures further in order to improve safety for workers. We will need some time to engage the various stakeholders, and we will take into account all the suggestions and proposals made forth. We actually look forward, including to working with the tripartite partners, the industry and unions on this, to find the way forward, a sensible and sustainable way forward. Regarding speed limits, presently, vehicles, such light good vehicles, already have a speed limit of either 60 kilometers per hour or the posted vehicle speed for that area, whichever is lower. And this is already well below the speed limit of 90 kilometers per hour on the expressway. So further reducing this speed is actually not recommended by the experts because when you increase the speed differential between the lorries and all the other motor vehicles on the expressway, it can lead to other safety issues. For instance, the increased tendency for overtaking maneuvers, which can increase the risk of accidents. With regards to the study that the member talked about, perhaps it could be one by, it's a Swedish study, which actually really talks about the impact of the vehicle on passengers if an accident were to occur, and that it will be less likely to cause serious and fatal accidents, injuries, if it is below 40 kilometers per hour. So that's really about the impact on the passengers if it's below. But here we also need to consider the potential, the increased potential of a risk of accident in the first instance, if we were to reduce, increase the speed differential. But having said that, as I've said in the review that we are undertaking, we'll consider all views and suggestions. And as what the members say, there may be other areas that we can look into. In regards to tying down equipment, actually under the Act, as well as guidelines issued by the Workplace Safety Council, the employers are already required to safely tie down the equipment or goods, or load the equipment or goods safely, so that it will not be a danger to the passengers. That is actually already a requirement. In fact, there are actually guidelines about loading the goods safely. And if in fact the lorries actually has goods or equipment, then the deck space allowable for ferrying the workers will be correspondingly reduced. I think I've covered the members' queries. Thank you.
Ms. Hertingru.
First, I'd like to thank the SMS for her commitment towards safety for our migrant workers. The SMS mentioned earlier that there will be a consultation with various stakeholders. So I would like to know whether the question I asked about studies to be done about how much costs will be increased by increasing any safety measures, whether there are any studies done, whether such studies will be done, so that we can have a more informed discussion. Because every time we bring this topic up, we hear the counter argument saying it will be increased costs. So we need to actually understand how much cost will be increased by before we can actually have a meaningful conversation about whether or not there will need to be further safety measures put in place. The second point that I want to have ask a SQ on is really, the SMS mentioned earlier as well that ferrying workers to the back of lorries is actually something that's done in other countries. But I note that this is not the case in all other countries. So I would like to know whether there's a study actually can also be done into those countries that outlaw this sort of practices, and to find out what sort of ways they actually use to actually overcome some of the costs and practical and operational issues that the SMS actually mentioned earlier.
Thank the member for her two supplementary questions. Indeed, as I noted, when we did the last study, there was strong feedback from the industry regarding the significant business costs. But actually, in addition to that, I've also mentioned that this really is not just about cost, it goes beyond cost, because at the ground, really, there are significant, real, practical and operational challenges on top of just cost consideration. But having said that, if we were to estimate the additional cost as a result of prohibiting the transport of workers in lorries and goods vehicles, then we'll need to have an understanding of the options that the industry will pivot to, whether it's buses, minivans, goods passenger vehicles, or even other options. And we will need to really undertake a detailed study and consultation with the industry. So it is something that we can consider as part of the review. With regards to practices, international practices, as I've also said in my reply, international practices are varied. And indeed, some of these countries that do allow, we think that, it's also, our challenges are not unique, and they probably have similar challenges. But I agree that even as we undertake a review, we'll consult the stakeholders in industries, and we'll also look at various practices, as well as technologies like the member earlier, Mr. Alex Yam said.
Mr. Murali Pillai.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, I'm glad to note from the Honourable Senior Minister of State's speech that the government is looking at the safety of migrant workers being transported in mini lorries very seriously. the Honourable Senior Minister of State mentioned about projects being delayed, in the course of this pandemic. And there's a sense out there in public, rightly or wrongly, that construction projects are being hurried to catch up with lost time. May I ask the Honourable Senior Minister of State what can be done in partnership with MOM to emphasize the safety message with the construction companies as well as the drivers? Thank you.
Thank the member for his question and for highlighting the fact that we need to continue to step up our outreach and engagement to the companies as well as to the drivers. So TP, for instance, actually have regular safety talks to the drivers to raise road safety awareness as well as to adopt safe driving habits. And we will need to continue to work together, LTA together with TP and MOM, to reach out, step up public education, sustain public education, and to outreach to them, to remind them to comply. For instance, the companies to comply with the rules and the safety rules and requirements that have already been put in place for worker safety, and to remind drivers of their obligations and responsibilities when ferrying workers.